audience report. I stepped in. How did you know that was difficulties? How did you know I needed your help?
I can't know, well, because it's not live.
Bring them to a close.
Oh, there's a delay of it.
Start making the body language. Disconnect the eye contact. And then it quiets down a little bit. Okay, awesome. If I could have the people who are observing these conversations raise your hands. Okay, I need you guys right now in this moment. The ones with the hands raised. So if you could just dig into your diaphragm and get your loudest speaking voices, because it's really, really hard to hear. I will repeat your answers. But I want to know, from these conversations that you just had, what were some notable traits? What stood out to you guys? So if I could get a hand. Maria, what did you see?
Well, I was able to be with Leslie and Caitlin, who now are roommates because Caitlin is living with Joe and Leslie. But one of the things that I really noticed was just both of them had explosive smiles as they were talking because they love each other. That was one thing that I knew. But also Leslie started the conversation and was so encouraging and appreciative and just wow, she just and that just made Caitlin beam. So the whole conversation for me, I just got this big smile. How could you not? You know, just listening to them encouraging each other. So
that's awesome. So I heard there was some body language that was exchanged. The mirror neurons were working with the smiles back and forth. I heard that Leslie initiated the conversation. I heard there was some context to this conversation. They're roommates. They started living together. That's awesome. What about anybody else? Danielle, sorry, if you could talk as loud as possible.
Okay, so I was listening to Sylvia and Maveen, and we don't know Sylvia, so Maveen was asking her lots of questions, trying to interact and get to know her on a personal basis.
Okay, that's a great point. There are different ways to phrase what we say in a conversation. She noticed that in this conversation, in order to get to know this person better, questions were required. So that's something to pay attention to. Is this a statement, an exclamation, a question, a demand, a request? All of those things are different ways that we communicate with each other. One more. Does anybody else have? Oh, I can't choose. Okay, Maria's gonna choose.
Annie,
Okay.
come on, Annie, loud.
I got to listen to Maria and Mariah talk about their day, and they just talked about how their day was going and how their day went, and we got to know each other. I didn't know Mariah, and just talking. But they asked questions about each other, and they were concerned, and we had follow-up questions, and then Maria was really excited about something that she's doing, and we got into learning more about her activities.
Okay, so just with some simple small talk, which in my research, there are a lot of people in our culture that hate small talk, but it's also regarded as a skill that you need to be able to do well in order to have a good conversation. So it's interesting. You like deep conversations, but getting into a deep conversation is hard without having a small talk first. So they did that well, and then that small talk led to emotions being expressed, excitement, joy, okay? Nice. You guys noticed some things just by sitting there and watching a couple conversations. You can do that also as you read your Bible. You can look at all of these different interactions with Jesus, and instead of just like, okay, what happened? Oh, he said this and this and this. You can say, well, how did he say it? Who started talking first? What type of sentence was used in the first interaction? And so these are some things that you guys just noted. Was who initiated? Was it a question, a statement? What was shared? Sometimes we share straight facts. If we're somebody who likes to read, like, I don't know, Google Scholar or something, we'll just, let me tell you all about trees. Sometimes it's all opinion. Well, I know fashion, and I am so much good at this thing. Opinions don't have to sound like that. That's just what came to mind. And I don't know fashion. Go to Kate for that. She will help you. There's other people too. That just popped in my mind. But also another thing that we do is we share stories. I heard Maria and Mariah started to share a story about their week. And these are all ways that we communicate. Jesus did the same thing. There's something that I want you also to think of is how is the flow of conversation? That's really important, is paying attention to the flow. Is there one person doing more talking? Is there one person that is doing nothing but stating facts, sharing no opinion? All of those things really bring a rich context to what we're learning. The last thing, which was the first thing that Maria noticed, is body language. We communicate so much more with our body, our eyes, our facial expression than we even do with our words, which is why everybody talks about texting and all of the nuances that come with with technological communication and how we can have a lot of mishaps there. But anyway, conversation, if you research it all, it's kind of, you get like a lot of information. It's kind of regarded on one end as a science and on the other end as an art. And it's kind of both of those things, right? Like, it's an art because you really have to be creative and masterful. Excuse me. I'm okay. Creative and masterful in the way that you connect. There's so many unique and different individuals among us. And so you can't just approach everybody with the exact same stance, exact same facial expression, exact same words. There's an art to it. There's creativity. Also being able to actually express what you mean. Oh my gosh, that's hard too. Like, I said this, but I think it came across like that. There's so much art. And then there's the science of knowing that, there's a give and a take. There are some things that you can look at and say, oh, I can change this. I can ask more questions instead of telling people my opinion all the time, and that will improve my conversation. And so it's this like mixture of art and science. And if you're like me, I don't know, sometimes I can just feel like the awkward turtle in a conversation where I'm like, am I giving too much? Am I taking too much? Am I sciencing when I'm supposed to be arting? Oh, you're sciencing? Sorry, I just arted. Like, that, it can feel like that a lot. And, like everything in life, I really think that Jesus is the answer to look at. Amen. And how to improve our conversation on both ends. He balanced the tension between so many things that work together in harmony when we're balanced. He did that, and so we could literally look at all of the Gospels and do this all night long, like all week long, all year long. But I just picked out two, just randomly, to look at. And the first one I wanted to look at is in John 3. So if we could turn there. Anybody guess who he's going to have a conversation with in John 3?
Nicodemus.
Yeah, that's who it is. Good old Nick. Alrighty. Are we there? We need a second?
Yep.
We're there? Okay. I'll go ahead and read. I'm going to read the whole encounter of Nicodemus. And then just keep in mind similar things that we did with that exercise. Look at this interaction and look at this conversation and see what you can get out of it that is not just the actual what is happening, the actual context, or content, I guess. It says, Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless, oops, Carrie skipped a whole 2 verses.
Back to verse 1.
Yeah, let's go back. So that's another thing in conversation, is paying attention and actually knowing. Okay. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. How can someone be born when they are old? Nicodemus asked. Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born. Jesus answered, very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at me saying, you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone of the Spirit. How can this be? Nicodemus asked. You are Israel's teacher, said Jesus, and you do not understand these things? Very truly, I tell you, we speak of what we know and we testify to what we have seen. But still, you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe, how then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but the people love the darkness instead of the light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light, for fear their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. Wow. Somebody was monopolizing this conversation a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. What do you guys see standing out here as you look at this conversation? Danielle?
3 times he said to him, very truly I tell you.
Yeah, Jesus was like, I'm about to tell you that this is a fact. Good stuff. Anything else stand out to anybody? Who initiated this conversation? Did anybody catch that? Nicodemus initiated it, right? This, just a little bit of context, this is almost immediately after the whole Jesus turning the water to wine, starting his ministry, goes and flips some tables in the temple, upset at the way they're treating his father's house. And then at night, Nicodemus comes to him and starts asking him these questions. So did you guys catch where this conversation took place? Does it say where it took place?
Well, it took place at night.
Mm-hmm.
Nicodemus came to him.
So where would you think it, could we make any inferences from that? It's at night, Nicodemus is coming to him.
A home.
A home,
Yeah.
right? It's probably not at the temple.
No.
It's probably not like Jesus' office hours. He's inviting him into this formal setting. So Nicodemus probably came and knocked on a door wherever he was staying, came to him at night, okay? And then how did Nicodemus start the conversation? What kind of statement did he use?
He encouraged him. He encouraged Jesus. He didn't really even ask the question. He's
Mm-hmm.
not asking the question, really.
He didn't.
You are God's son. Or,
Yeah.
you're a teacher from God. I guess not God's son, but you're a teacher from God. So he really encourages him.
Okay, so Rose says he walks up to this guy, or this house, knocks on the door, and then Jesus answers, and he's like, hey, and he tells him something encouraging. You're God's son. And then the flow of the conversation, does it stay in that encouraging vein the whole way through? What do you see?
Well,
Joanne?
I wanted to back up just a little bit, because it almost seemed to me like Nicodemus is trying to promote himself in a way, like, because he's saying, almost like, it seemed like he's elevating himself, like we know that you're a man from God, we understand what's happening here, we know you're a man from God.
Okay, Joanne says that she kind of sees that although he comes to him and says something encouraging, she's catching a little bit of arrogance maybe, coming to Jesus and saying, like, we know this of you. This is something this is putting himself in a certain posture while he's encouraging him, but also saying it's something that he knows and he's bringing to Jesus. That's an interesting thing to know. Okay? And then Jesus' answer. Danielle noticed, was it Danielle that said he said very truly 3 times? Yeah. Notice that Jesus is like, okay, you're coming at me with facts. Well, let me tell you some facts. And then Jesus gets into some more facts telling. So we notice here that in this sharing, there might be opinion, there's probably body language. We don't see, can you guys see anywhere that we see body language come up? Anybody catch body language? I didn't catch any body language when I looked at it. We can make assumptions, but we don't know what the body language is saying. But we do see that it starts off with just a statement, and then Jesus coming back with more statements of facts. And then do we see any questions in here? What are the questions? Who asks the questions? Nicodemus starts with the first question, right? So Jesus is, this is interesting, right? Jesus knows what the question we all have is. Like, he knows what we're really coming for. Nicodemus tries to come with this status of, I'm going to tell you something nice, and eventually gets to the place where he asks a question that he really needs an answer to. And does Jesus tell him exactly the answer to his question right away?
No, he doesn't.
Jesus does something that we'll see a lot. Jesus answers a question with a question, but we do see that he actually answers Nicodemus' question.
Yes.
And that's not always the case in a lot of the interactions with Jesus. So this is an interesting interaction because we get to see how Jesus responds to somebody coming to him in flattery. We get to see him respond to a question with a question. But we also get to see one of the times that he actually answers the question that is asked of him without leaving the person completely perplexed. He starts off with that though, right? He starts off with telling him you gotta be born again, and Nicodemus was like, I don't know what to do with that. But then he tells him just exactly what the state of his heart is in when he goes through talking about the difference between coming to him in the light and darkness. All right. So you
Very
could,
clear with him, made it very simple, because mostly Jesus did things in parable.
yeah. So that's another good point. There's some disconnect, I think, amongst different scholars about exactly what makes a parable. So there will be argument about how many parables there actually are. But this one, he's not telling you something that needs, he's not talking about something that is outside of the conversation and trying to draw a point based off of, like, I don't know, what he bought at the store. He's very directly talking about the things that Nicodemus is asking him. So yeah, you see that. Let's look at, I was also going to note that this passage says so much between the lines. And because I'm mainly looking at the conversation style of Jesus, I'm not going to even touch all of the stuff that's in there, but it's a lot, and it's an amazing interaction with Jesus. I wanted to look at one other, I think we have time to do another, and then I wanted you guys to look at some. But I wanted to look at Luke 19. Anybody know who we're going to look at next? He's in Luke 19.
Zacchaeus?
Yeah, that's the guy, Zacchaeus. I learned a song about him when I went to Sunday school. And do you guys know the song? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, see it? Yeah. I like that
I
song.
love that song.
Yeah.
It's an oldie but
Now, does it have any, movements to it?
I think a little like,
Oh, yeah, he climbed up in the sycamore tree. Okay.
Lord, he wanted to see.
If I could sing, I would sing it to you, but it's just not really for you guys. So let's look at Luke 19, and I'll actually start in verse 1 this time. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed the sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Again, there's a lot going on in this interaction that is amazing, powerful, life-changing. And I just want to look at the conversation. What stood out to you about this conversation? Where are we? Where did this take place? Anybody catch it? Outside. Jericho. Yeah, I would guess it's outside. There's not many places that I've seen a tree growing inside. There are some. Yeah. But yeah, so it's outside. There's a big tree. There's a lot of people, and there's a big tree, and that's where Zacchaeus is. Who initiates this conversation?
Jesus does.
Jesus. And how did he initiate it?
Come on down.
Uh-huh. What did he do before he told him to come down?
He was stuck there.
He looked. So we can see Jesus' body language here. And this is something very unique about Jesus, is the way he does look at people. He He makes eye contact with people that were avoided. We caught who Zacchaeus was. We know, I think most of us, if we don't know, let me tell you, that tax collectors were not well regarded. They weren't people that got a lot of friendly hellos and looks in the eye. They were people who were ignored. They were people, maybe not ignored, but avoided, ridiculed for just the way they treated other people. And Jesus looked at him and looked him in the eye. And then he was kind to him. He told him to come down and asked to stay with him. So, what type of phrase was used in the initiation? The demand, right? It was a little bit more than a statement. It wasn't, Zacchaeus, we're in a tree. It was, Zacchaeus, come down. And then he also demanded to stay with him. So you see that happen. And then you see, this isn't, I feel like there's some pieces left out of this conversation, or maybe this is exactly how it went, but it's just interesting that he comes down, and then Zacchaeus' response is, I'm gonna give it like most of my stuff away, because you asked to stay with me. Maybe we missed some things, and maybe it was just that sheer body language of Jesus looking him in the eye. Maybe that's all it took for Zacchaeus' heart to just like wrench inside of him. We don't know. We don't know exactly, but we know his response was great. So just as we looked at all of those two different conversations, you can take the Gospels and you can take interactions with individuals, with people, and you can look at them and learn so much just by asking yourself, what happened in this interaction? Did Jesus start it? Did the other person start it? How does Jesus respond when someone else initiates? Honestly, Jesus' conversations were revolutionary at the time, but they're still revolutionary today. They still don't make a lot of sense in the way we do things, and they didn't make a lot of sense then. We know that he broke so many social norms. We know that he wasn't just following the niceties of the time. He wasn't trying to not make a wave. One of the biggest things biggest social norm that he broke was the way he spoke to women and treated women. That was not common. We all know, not we all know, but a lot of people know that in the first century in this area, women were not treated as just equal citizens. They might have been property, they might have been second-class citizens, but they weren't regarded. They weren't even mentioned many times in history, but that's not the case with Jesus. I did this not so thorough or scholarly count, so please don't repeat everything I say. Go check it for yourself. But I counted that Jesus spoke directly to over 40 individuals. So I'm not talking about like when he's like directing his conversation to a whole crowd, but just interactions with individuals. Okay. And that's in the 4 Gospels, he's recorded speaking to women. It was around 20 times. Some of it is a repeat because they tell the same story, but I think that's even significant that a woman got her story told twice or 3 times, so that's even cooler, so I counted it again. But 20 times he was recorded speaking to women, doing something that was just a cultural faux pas. He did it. And then, I don't know if anybody can guess what his longest recorded conversation was. Does anybody know? Yeah. So, aside from him breaking that norm of actually speaking to women and treating them with dignity, he also spoke to them quite a bit. It was recorded quite a bit. But he spoke to them for a long time, and longer than anybody else is recorded speaking to him and having a dialogue back and forth. And that, to me, says a lot about him. Not just what he said in the conversation, but the fact that it was recorded and it happened, and it's significant. I love the facts that are between the lines. Another thing was that you guys caught this as you saw where Zacchaeus was and then where Nicodemus was, is that Jesus was a rabbi, so he was a teacher, but he did not do the traditional rabbi-teacher thing where he met people in the synagogue. This is my place of my profession, this is where I have authority, and this is where I will speak the truth to you. No, he is recorded 130 different times interacting with people. Now this includes the multitudes of people, whether people are overhearing him, or he's speaking directly to crowds, or it's a one-on-one, or it's like 5 people that he's talking to. All of that. It's over 130 different times, and only 10 of those times does it make note that it's actually in like a temple or a synagogue. So, over 120 times, Jesus is going about his day. He's on his commute, like stops on the road, and there's a guy hanging out of a tree. People are at work. He's like, hey, I see you're fishing. Like, that's a nice job. Now come fish with me. While they're out getting their groceries. I don't know if the Samaritan woman counts as getting groceries, but, you know.
Water.
Yeah, I'm like, we buy water, so I count that as groceries. But you get the picture. He didn't rely on doing it the appropriate way according to what was expected of him. He met people where they were, and that's where he had the conversation. Let's see. So you guys noticed a lot of the different ways that he communicated. We talked about the questions. Wanted to talk about his questions a little bit. Between the 4 Gospels, can anybody guess how many questions Jesus asks?
150?
We got 150. Any other takers?
75.
75. Anybody else?
300.
Did you look at my notes? I got it. It's over 300 times. And so as you look through these things, it's hard to really keep track because there's a question abbreviated with something else. But yeah, it's over 300 questions that Jesus asks. Does it ever so we know he liked to ask questions, but do you ever stop and ask yourself but Jesus knew all the answers? Jesus knew the answer. He was omniscient. I was like omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, that's the one. He knew everything. So he knew the answers. It's not like he was like, what is the square root of 9 again, guys? Somebody help me out. He asked the question knowing full well what the true answer was. Not what he knew what you were going to say, but what the true answer. So why does he ask so many questions? Why do you think? We'll go with Joanne.
I was going to say because he was a teacher, he was trying to teach the people, and it's a form of teaching.
Okay, so Joanne thinks because he's a teacher, and it's a form of teaching to ask questions. So we'll do Ellen and then Leisha.
I think it's because he wanted the people to think about it themselves and see what they were thinking.
Okay, so Ellen thinks Jesus didn't want to just tell them, or he wanted people to think about it for themselves. He didn't just want to tell them. What about you?
I think he was looking for faith, that they had faith, and so he was drawing them out to see what they believed.
Okay, so Alicia says he's looking for faith and drawing them out for faith. I think all of those are relevant answers. I think Jesus wanted to connect with the heart, and he doesn't want us to just sit there passively and be told what to do and then we do it. But he wants us to also be engaged in the conversation, and a question is an amazing way to engage somebody. Because he can't just tell us truths. He can just blast us, but he doesn't. You want to know something kind of funny, though? Is he asked over 300 questions. Do you know how many questions were asked of Jesus? Any guesses?
3.
Okay, there are 3 questions asked of him. Anybody have any other guesses? 25? No $1? Okay, so Rose is on to something. He was asked, people came to him and asked him over 180 questions.
Wow.
Rose got the answer to how many he actually answered directly. He's only recorded directly answering 3 questions. I would be so, I do this to my kids. I'll ask them things. If they don't answer my question, I'm like,
Right.
But that's what Jesus did, and it wasn't to irritate people. It was to teach them. It was to help them increase their faith. It was to draw them out. So another thing that is an iconic speech pattern of Jesus is speaking truth. We saw that with Nicodemus. He goes straight into, I'm going to tell you the truth. Sometimes he doesn't sugarcoat it at all. He just tells the truth. And did you guys catch who Nicodemus was? What type of person he was? Anybody? He's a Pharisee, right? And so that's a time where you see Jesus speaking the hardest truth without sugarcoating it the most. Right? And then, let's see. Yeah, I don't think Nicodemus was ready to be like called out for the parallel of living in the dark and coming to him in the dark. Like, I don't think he was looking for that when he came with this really nice compliment. Another thing is how Jesus engages the person. What were you going to say, Brenda?
I was going to say, also when someone asks about questions, they get to know who the person is.
Yeah, it's hard to know someone.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard to know someone if you don't ask them any questions.
And their soul. And so Jesus will get to know who truly that the person is and who, you know.
Yeah, I hear that.
And how, you know, being a teacher, you know, that's how you find out how you can help people.
Yeah,
And
Jesus doesn't
they
want.
are.
Yeah. I think that that's something that I saw as I looked at the questions, was that he doesn't want to push the truth on us, but he wants us to dig deep, and he wants us to engage in the search for the answer. Like, hence the ask, seek, knock. Like, he wants us to be interactive in it. And so these questions a lot of time are to help us open up those areas. I love that. Thanks, Brenda. The other thing that I was noticing is how he engages the person. We saw the body language with Zacchaeus, the eye contact. We know that he touched people that were not used to be touching. They were not used to be touching. Being touched. So like the deaf mute, that's how he heals them. The blind man,
Right.
one where he spits in mud and then rubs it in his eyes.
Yep.
Jesus just was unconventional, and that was all part of his communication with people. He helped people feel seen. I'm thinking of the bleeding woman and how she was not used to being seen. And Jesus not only saw her, but made her identify herself so he could give her a new identity. Those are all ways that he engaged people and didn't let it just be this monologue all the time. And then the one that I feel like he's the most famous for, I think we know he asks questions, but I think the parables and storytelling, like Jesus loved story time. Like he was like, ask me a question, oh, I'm ready. And something that I thought of recently, here's a fun fact before I go into what I thought of. It's not as, it might be fun, but it's not a fact. It's, like I said about the different discussion among the different scholars, is that there's, parables are defined in different ways. So depending on how you define it, there are between 30 and 50 parables that are recorded by the gospel writers. So Jesus did this a lot. He spoke in parables a lot. But anyway, what I was going to say about story time and how we love story time, I know that I'm in an era that might be different from many people here, so I will just take a poll and then I might move on if it's not going to be relevant. But do we have any Bluey fans? Does anybody know of Bluey? So we've got grandmas know Bluey. So Bluey's this cute little cartoon. It's Australian dogs. And you watch it and it's so cute. Like the parents play with the kids and you're just like, oh, how sweet.
Yeah.
And you don't know that Bluey is teaching you some stuff, right? Like you're watching it and you're like, oh, this is so entertaining. And Bluey's a lot like some of the parables that Jesus told. There's this one episode of Bluey where the mom dog takes her kids to go see her dad, so the grandpa. It's a trip to the grandparents. And the grandpa's health is not great. And so the mom is worried about the grandpa. But the grandpa is like, let's play. So he takes the kids and he's running away from the mom the whole time. And the whole episode is the grandpa like running through the woods with the kids, and the kids are having such a good time running from their mom, playing with their grandpa. And you do not even realize that it's about the sandwich generation and the stress and worry that they feel raising their own kids, worrying about their parents' health, and really trying to hold all of that together, and how their emotions come out and impact both of those generations. And you don't realize that because it's just such a great show. And sometimes the parables were like that. Jesus would give you a nice story, and then you're like, oh, there was something hidden in there that got straight to the heart. But yeah, Bluey will leave your mind blown if you think about what you just watched for a second. And the last thing I wanted to draw attention to that Jesus used maybe not frequently, but it's a prominent part of his conversation style, is silence. Who is uncomfortable with silence? Got some takers right there. Silence in a conversation. Maybe not silence in general, but if you're in a conversation, is anybody just like, I'm 100% comfortable if we're just sitting there staring at each other?
No.
No. It is a little uncomfortable, honestly. So I have my master's in psychology and a master's in counseling. It took me 2 to get it right. And one of the things that you're trained to do is to sit in silence, and it's actually considered a higher level counseling skill. So a lower level counseling skill is something like, oh, you had a hard day today. How did that make you feel? That's a lower level one. A higher level is to know when to not say something and to sit there. And Jesus does that. Jesus will sit in silence. He will let his accusers yell things at him, and he knows when to hold his tongue, and he uses it well. And so these are all different ways that Jesus communicated that we can learn so much from. And we can also take those thoughts and look at different interactions that Jesus had with people and learn a lot just based on the way he spoke to them and how he loved them, whether it was with silence, a parable, or just telling them straight up the truth. I was going to reserve time to break up in groups. We don't have that much time. It's only 13 minutes. So perhaps we talk amongst ourselves, and I don't have any discussion questions. So maybe we end in a prayer and then fellowship.
Yeah,
Is that a good idea?
Sounds